Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Ethan Walker, and for 8 long years, I let the world believe I was nothing more than a jobless, aimless husband living off my wife's charity. They mocked me, laughed behind my back, hell, sometimes to my face. Even Vanessa, the woman I once loved, made me the punchline of her dinner parties. But what none of them knew was that I was quietly building an empire. And the night they thought I was at my lowest was the night I decided it was time to show them who I really was. You want to know how I turned the tables? Keep listening. To the world. Hell, even to my wife Vanessa. I was just another guy who couldn't keep a job. A dreamer, a drifter, a disappointment. And I played that part to perfection. While she sipped wine with her flawless friends and complained about being the only adult in the marriage, I stayed silent, watching, calculating. That night started like any other. We were hosting one of Vanessa's infamous dinner parties. The kind where the women wore $1,000 dresses just to eat finger food, and the men boasted about their golf scores and business trips as if they were competing in a corporate Olympics. I sat at the edge of the leather sectional, swirling a glass of water, trying not to draw attention to myself. Vanessa, of course, was glowing in the spotlight, her curls perfect, her makeup flawless, that pearl necklace I bought her catching the light just right. She was in her element. Queen of the castle, hostess of the year. And I was her jester. Ethan, sweetheart, she purred, her voice dripping with that rehearsed sweetness she used when she was about to humiliate me. Why don't you tell everyone about your latest job hunt? Her friends burst into laughter before I could even open my mouth. My jaw clenched. Monica, her best friend and personal echo chamber, chimed in with a smirk. Honestly, Vanessa, you're so patient. I'd have snapped if my husband couldn't land a job in what, 3 years? 4. Try 5, Vanessa said, grinning. But who's counting? The room exploded with laughter again. I smiled, tight-lipped, forced. The same smile I'd worn 1,000 times before. They thought they were clever. They thought they were funny. I could have laughed too, because what none of them knew was that Monica's cushy job in marketing. I gave it to her. Her promotion last year? Approved by me. Her salary? Signed off by yours truly. I had her resignation letter drafted and sitting in a folder on my laptop upstairs. All I had to do was hit print. But tonight wasn't the night. Timing is everything. Vanessa swirled her wine with a dramatic sigh. At least he can cook. You should try his spaghetti. The man's a genius with meatballs. Someone has to do the dishes around here, right? More laughter. Even the husbands joined in, their smug chuckles bouncing off the marble floors and vaulted ceilings of the house I paid for. They didn't know Vanessa's part-time charity gig didn't even cover her spa bills, let alone this mansion or the 3 luxury cars out front. But they believed her, because it was easier that way. And I let them. I let them mock me, laugh at me, belittle me. Because I needed them to keep believing the lie. Remember that time Ethan thought he could be a consultant? Vanessa said, raising her voice. What was it? Summit something. He spent weeks prepping, poor thing. They didn't even call him back. That one stung more than I'd like to admit. Because what Vanessa didn't know was that interview had been a quarterly audit. A routine check-in to test my own managers. I sat across the table from my company's hiring team to see how they handled candidates under pressure. They had no idea who I was. Neither did she. I took another sip of water to hide my clenched teeth. Let them talk. Let them laugh. Let them think I was some washed-up man with a dream that never landed. Because less than 12 hours from now, their entire world would flip upside down. As the party dragged on, Vanessa turned to Monica and said, honestly, I don't know how much longer I can do this. A man without ambition is just embarrassing. Embarrassing. That's what she called me. I stood up and offered to get another bottle of champagne. She waved me off like a servant. Be a dear, won't you? As I walked into the kitchen, I checked the clock. 9:47 p.m. Less than 12 hours until the board meeting. Less than 12 hours until I reminded every single one of them who I really was. I uncorked the bottle slowly, letting the pressure ease with a soft hiss. My reflection stared back at me from the stainless steel fridge. Calm, composed, dangerous. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was focused. They'd pushed and pushed, thinking the quiet husband was harmless. They didn't know they were standing on a trap I'd spent years building. I returned to the living room, placed the bottle on the table, and took my seat at the edge again, silent, invisible, and underestimated. Exactly where I wanted to be. Because when that clock struck 9 the next morning, the masks would fall, and the reckoning would begin. The party dragged on, and so did the insults. Vanessa, lit by compliments and champagne, leaned in for her final performance. "Monica," she called across the room, swirling her glass like a practiced actress. "You should have seen Ethan last month. He found this job listing online and thought it was perfect. He spent hours on the application, hours, like he had any shot." She paused for dramatic effect. They didn't even bother sending a rejection. The room exploded with laughter. Again, my smile didn't falter. That same job listing? It was a trap. A controlled recruitment post designed to test how middle management reviewed applications. It was a formality I'd personally implemented to weed out bias and incompetence in hiring. Vanessa mocked it like it was a joke, but that application had revealed more about my team than she could ever comprehend. I just happened to be the applicant this time. I looked around at the sea of smug faces. These weren't just Vanessa's friends. They were my employees, my department heads, my executives, the people I trusted to represent the core values of my company. And tonight, I saw them for who they really were. Tasha, sitting with her legs crossed in the corner, raised her glass. "Honestly, babe, you're a saint for putting up with him. If my husband were that useless, I'd have walked a long time ago." "Oh, believe me, I've thought about it." Vanessa sighed, performing her best weary wife routine. "But I tell myself, I'm married for love, not ambition." Every muscle in my jaw tightened, but I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I was prepared. Their arrogance wasn't just noise, it was ammunition. They thought they were untouchable, that their jobs, their salaries, their titles came from talent alone. They had no idea how many strings I pulled to keep them exactly where I needed them. They never questioned their quick promotions, never wondered how their expense reports always got approved. They were too busy admiring their own reflections to see the man behind the curtain. I remembered every slight, every careless remark, every time Vanessa had weaponized my silence in public. Like when she told her friends I should apply to be a barista. "At least then he'd bring in tips," she said with a snort. That cafe? I owned it. Just like I owned the wine they were drinking, the champagne they clinked with such entitlement, and the house they called home. Vanessa was basking in their admiration, basking in her carefully crafted lie, that she was the provider, the successful woman keeping the ship afloat. Meanwhile, the failure by her side was the reason the ship even existed. I watched her closely, sipping my water as if it were fine scotch. She had no idea she was about to lose it all. She flashed a smile at me. "Maybe you should listen to me for once, Ethan. I mean, what's the harm? You might actually get a job." I tilted my head slightly and answered, "Maybe you're right. I'll look into it." She blinked. That wasn't the response she expected. Vanessa loved conflict. She thrived on it. She wanted me to push back, to snap, to defend myself just enough to make her look like the composed one in front of her friends. But I gave her nothing, and that unsettled her. She turned back to the group, trying to reclaim the attention. "Anyway, as I was saying, it's not easy being the only breadwinner in the house. But someone's got to keep the lights on." I almost laughed. The mortgage? Paid in full 5 years ago. The Range Rover she loved bragging about? Bought in cash. The spa packages, luxury vacations, designer handbags, all paid from accounts she didn't even know existed. I let her play the role of provider, let her feel powerful. She never once asked how we could afford the lifestyle she flaunted. Because deep down, she didn't want to know. That night, the wine kept flowing, the laughter kept ringing, and I played my part. Quiet, harmless, the husband everyone pitied. But at 10 p.m., when I checked my phone again, all I saw was the countdown. 11 hours. That's all that separated Vanessa and her friends from the cold, hard truth. Tomorrow, they'd walk into my company thinking it was just another Monday. They'd sit in their plush chairs, sip their coffee, gossip about their latest purchases, and laugh about the loser husband one last time. And then the doors would shut, the curtains would fall, and I'd stop pretending. The man they mocked wasn't a loser. He was their boss, and he was done playing games. The house was silent when I finally escaped upstairs that night. The party below still echoed faintly, glasses clinking, laughter sharp and hollow like broken crystal. I shut the door to my study and locked it behind me. For the first time that evening, I let the mask slip. Gone was the quiet husband, the man who smiled politely while being humiliated in his own home. Alone, I was exactly who I'd always been. Ethan Walker, founder and CEO of Orion Tech. The empire they thought they ran. I built it. I walked to the bookshelf and pressed the hidden latch behind a row of faux business books. A quiet click, then the back panel slid open to reveal a recessed workspace with 3 monitors already glowing softly in the dark. Fingerprint secured. Triple encrypted. Only I had access. I sat down and pulled up the files. Everything was organized. Every transaction, every message, every surveillance clip cataloged and ready. First, I reviewed the internal audit on Monica, Vanessa's closest friend and the one who laughed the loudest tonight. She'd been the head of marketing at Orion Tech for 4 years. Her department's spending? Inflated beyond belief. Corporate retreats, brand investments, client engagement. All excuses for lavish shopping sprees, spa weekends, even first-class flights to Paris. Every receipt was in front of me. She thought no one noticed, but I had eyes on everything. Next, I opened the file on Tasha, the queen of human resources. Her sin wasn't theft, it was silence. Her inbox was a graveyard of ignored harassment complaints. Whistleblowers buried under polite rejections. And worse, she'd covered for Greg, our VP of sales, when he was caught falsifying quarterly numbers to earn his bonus. She hadn't just ignored corruption. She protected it. I pulled up Greg's reports. Inflated projections, doctored spreadsheets, fake client accounts, all signed off under his name. It would be almost impressive if it weren't so pathetic. Then there was Scott, head of operations. I always had suspicions about him. Now I had proof, audio recordings of late-night calls with our competitor, whispering about data leaks and internal specs. He'd sold us out piece by piece. And yet, the 4 of them had sat in my living room hours earlier, sipping my champagne, laughing at my expense, never suspecting that the man they mocked was the architect of their entire careers. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the clock. 10:34 p.m. In less than 11 hours, they'd walk into the office thinking they were safe, untouchable. They had no idea the trap was already sprung. But there was one more file to open. Vanessa. She didn't work at the company, not directly. But in many ways, she was the worst offender. The enabler. The queen of the illusion. Every month, I wired money into her personal account under the guise of a trust fund. She believed it came from family inheritance, some lie I'd told years ago to keep her out of my business. And she never questioned it. She used that money to live like royalty while speaking about me like I was a dog under her heel. I pulled up her recent phone records. My stomach turned as I read the messages. Flirtations at first, then hotel bookings. Weekend charity retreats that were actually getaways with another man. Photos attached, her hand on his thigh in a beach cabana, a kiss captured in a hotel lobby, timestamped 3 days before our anniversary. I stared at the screen. I felt no tears, no heartbreak, just clarity. She wasn't my partner. She was a parasite. And tomorrow, I'd finally cut her off for good. I began drafting the termination letters for the executives. I added everything: evidence, timestamps, legal grounds. All watertight. I'd already briefed my legal team under a sealed directive 2 weeks earlier. At the time, they didn't know who I planned to fire. Now they'd understand. When the letters were done, I uploaded them to the secure server. Then I turned to the divorce file. Vanessa had signed a prenuptial agreement when we married. Ironclad. It guaranteed she'd leave with nothing if infidelity or financial deception ever surfaced. And now, I had both, wrapped in neat little PDF files with her name all over them. I stared at her file for a moment longer, then closed it. There was nothing left to feel. I leaned forward, typed one final message to my executive assistant, Sarah. Everything is in motion. Finalize boardroom preparations. Tomorrow, I take back control. Her reply came within seconds. All set. Let the games begin. I shut down the screens and locked the panel back into place. The room returned to darkness, but inside me, a fire had ignited. The man they thought was weak, the one they laughed at and dismissed, he was the storm they never saw coming. And by this time tomorrow, they'd all be swept away. I barely slept that night. Not because of nerves. No, those had burned out long ago. What kept me awake was anticipation. That electric silence before a thunderstorm. The kind you feel in your bones, just before the first crack of lightning splits the sky. By 5:30 a.m., I was up. The house was still. Vanessa lay sprawled across our California king bed, her expression peaceful, unaware that her world was about to collapse. I showered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit I hadn't worn in years, and fastened the cufflinks my father had given me the day I signed Orion Tech's first major contract. Back then, I was just a young man with a borrowed laptop and a garage full of whiteboards. Today, I was something else entirely. I walked downstairs, grabbed my briefcase, and stepped outside. A black sedan waited by the curb, engine humming. Charles, my longtime driver, greeted me with a nod. He didn't ask questions, he never had, but something in his eyes told me he could sense the shift. To Orion headquarters, I said. We drove in silence. The city was just waking up, neon signs flickering off as the sun threatened to rise. I checked my phone. A message from Sarah blinked across the screen. Boardroom prepared. Legal team standing by. Termination files uploaded and secured. Perfect. By the time we arrived, I bypassed the main entrance, slipping through the private executive elevator only I had access to. For years, I avoided attention, letting my hand-picked executives take the spotlight while I stayed in the shadows. They thought I preferred to be invisible. They mistook distance for disinterest. But today, that distance would become their downfall. Sarah met me in the security office. Always sharp, always composed. They're all here, she said, gesturing to the monitors. Monica, Tasha, Greg, Scott, they clocked in right on time. Vanessa isn't in the building yet, but she's called Monica twice. I glanced at the screen. There they were, laughing, drinking coffee, exchanging gossip about weekend plans and clueless applicants. Let them enjoy their last morning, I said quietly. They've earned that much. At 9 a.m. sharp, I stepped into the executive conference room. They didn't recognize me at first. Dressed sharp, expression calm, I took the seat at the head of the long mahogany table. Monica blinked at me, confused. Greg glanced down at his phone. Tasha gave me the once-over like I was an intern in the wrong room. Can we help you? Monica asked, her tone clipped. You already have, I replied, opening my folder. I'm Ethan Walker, founder and CEO of Orion Tech. Silence. The kind of silence that swallows a room whole. Scott chuckled nervously. Wait, this is a joke, right? You're the CEO? I tapped a button on the remote. The large display behind me lit up with incorporation papers, company registration documents, even a photo of me at Orion's ribbon-cutting ceremony. Beard shorter, eyes just as cold. Their faces changed instantly. Tasha's mouth fell open. Monica went pale. Greg looked like he might throw up. I've been watching, I said. Every misused dollar. Every covered-up complaint. Every smug little conversation. You built a culture of arrogance and entitlement under my roof. Monica tried to speak, but I raised a hand. No interruptions. You've had years to speak over me. Now you listen. I walked through the evidence. Expense reports for personal vacations labeled as branding trips, HR emails burying harassment cases, sales figures manipulated to secure bonuses. I even showed footage of Scott discussing proprietary software with a rival firm over dinner. You thought I was the help, I said, staring them down one by one. But I was the architect. You thought I was beneath you, and now you're beneath my scrutiny. Sarah entered the room and handed each of them a thick envelope, termination letters, with detailed evidence attached. Effective immediately, I said. Security will escort you from the premises. Your access to company systems is already revoked. Greg stood up, fists clenched. You can't do this. I just did. Tasha tried a softer angle. Ethan, Mr. Walker, please. We didn't know. We didn't mean. Spare me. I snapped. You knew exactly who you were when you laughed in my face, in my home. You just didn't know who I was. That's your mistake. As the guards entered, they stood in stunned silence. No more smirks. No more jokes. Just pale faces and trembling hands. Goodbye, I said, turning away. And just like that, the wolves were out of my house. But I wasn't done, because Vanessa hadn't arrived yet, and hers would be the final betrayal to face. I checked my watch. It was only 9:23 a.m. Plenty of time left for the storm. At exactly 10:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Vanessa, incoming call. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. My voice was steady, cold. Ethan speaking. Ethan, she snapped, her voice already halfway between fury and disbelief. What the hell is going on? Monica just called me sobbing. She said you fired her, and Greg, and Tasha, and security dragged them out like criminals. They weren't dragged, I replied calmly. They walked. Eventually. You've lost your mind, she hissed. You can't fire them. They're my friends. I let a pause settle between us. One of those thick, sharp silences that makes people uneasy. They worked for me, Vanessa, I said finally. They always have. And now they don't. Silence on her end now. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the truth. About the company I built from scratch. About the empire I let you think didn't exist. You what? I own Orion Tech. Every paycheck Monica ever cashed, every raise Greg ever gloated about, every event Tasha ever coordinated, they were signed, approved, and funded by me. The man you've spent the last 5 years mocking in front of them. Her breath hitched. No, you're lying. You never. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, I said, cutting her off. Because I needed to see who you'd become when you thought you were better than me. Another silence. Then her voice, quieter, more fragile. Why are you doing this? Because I'm done playing the fool. I hung up. 10 minutes later, I watched through the security feed as she stormed through the front doors of Orion Tech. Dressed to impress. Heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floor, rage simmering behind her designer sunglasses. She didn't even speak to the receptionist. Just barreled through the halls like she owned the place. She didn't. Not anymore. I stood when she entered my office. She slammed the door behind her, fury radiating off her like heat. Ethan, she said through clenched teeth, I don't know what game you're playing, but it ends now. You've embarrassed me. You've ruined everything. No, I said, stepping around the desk. I've revealed everything. There's a difference. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. She only knew the version I let her see. The house, the cars, the vacations, they were all yours? She asked, voice trembling. I nodded. Every cent. Every luxury you paraded in front of your friends. I paid for all of it. While you were making me the punchline of every dinner party, I was the one holding it all together. You lied to me, she said, voice rising. You made me look like a fool. No, I said, my tone razor sharp. You did that to yourself. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hands shook. For the first time, she looked small, powerless. The queen with her crown cracked wide open. I want a divorce, I said. Calm. Final. She blinked. You can't be serious. I stepped to my desk and pulled out the manila folder I'd been waiting to present. I slid it toward her. Prenuptial agreement. Signed and notarized before our wedding. Ironclad. You walk away with what you came with. Nothing more. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second, and then they widened. You set me up, she whispered. You planned all of this. I protected what was mine, I said. Because deep down, I always knew the truth. She stood there for a moment, completely still. Then, like a last, desperate play, she tried the one thing that had always worked. She cried, Ethan, please. We were good once. We were in love. No, I said, stepping back. You were in love with the idea of success. You thought I was your ticket. And when you believed that ticket expired, you turned on me. You can't just throw me away, she said, tears now falling freely. I'm your wife. Not anymore, I replied. Security's waiting outside. You can take what you brought into the marriage. Nothing more. She didn't move at first. She just stared at me like she was searching for the version of me she used to control. But that man was gone. She turned slowly, opened the door, and stepped out. The guards followed her, silent and professional. I stood by the window, watching as she exited the building for the last time. The sun was shining now, bright and indifferent. And for the first time in 8 years, I felt free. By the time Vanessa disappeared down the front steps of Orion Tech, the building had already shifted. The weight of years, the toxic laughter, the backroom deals, the fake smiles, was gone. Stripped away like rot from the beams of a once great structure. And now, what remained was mine to rebuild. But my work wasn't finished. After Vanessa left, I returned to my office, closed the door, and opened the next file on my screen. It was time to finish what I'd started. Sarah entered moments later, her expression unreadable as always, though I caught the slight arch of satisfaction in her brow. She was the only one who knew everything. My confidant. My second in command. The final exits are complete, she said, handing me a tablet. HR processed the terminations. Security walked them all out without incident. Well, except Monica. She tried to call legal on her way out. She'll find every door closed. I said, I've already spoken to every firm in the city. No one will touch her. And Greg already served notice of investigation. We're freezing his assets within the hour. Scott's next. Sarah nodded, calm and methodical. That's what I liked about her. She didn't ask why. She already knew. And the press? I asked. We've declined all comment. But word's getting out. The financial community is surprised. I smirked. Let them be. I turned back to the screen and opened the live feeds from the exit interviews. Each one had been recorded for legal and personal reasons. Not out of spite, out of necessity. The video of Monica played first. She was red-faced, voice shrill, slamming her manicured hand on the table. This is insane, she barked. I've built this department. You can't just erase me. The HR rep remained composed. Your termination is for cause. Misappropriation of funds. Breach of fiduciary duty. There will be no severance. I'll sue. You're welcome to try. But your contract is airtight. She stormed out 5 minutes later, slamming the door behind her. Next was Greg. He didn't yell. He just sat there, deflated. I've got a mortgage, he mumbled. Kids. You can't. You falsified reports. You stole bonuses. You used your title to manipulate results for years, the rep replied. There are consequences. Greg didn't even argue. He just lowered his head and whispered. I thought I was untouchable. That made two of us. Scott followed. He barely spoke at all. Just sat there, numb, as the list of evidence was read aloud. Calls, emails, account transfers. The betrayal was obvious. It dripped from every line of code he leaked. Angela, the HR director who'd silenced every complaint, was the last. She came in like a hurricane, screaming discrimination, injustice, revenge. This is retaliation, she howled. You're firing me because I spoke the truth. You're being fired, the rep said evenly, because you covered up workplace harassment, manipulated employee records, and created a culture of fear. We have the documentation, and the testimonies, and the audio. Angela went quiet, completely still, then said softly, You'll regret this. But I wouldn't. I already knew that. Sarah turned off the last feed. They're done, she said. And they were. Careers ended. Reputations shattered. But justice? Justice had just begun. By noon, the office felt new. The tension that had once infected every meeting, every hallway whisper, it was gone. I walked the halls and, for the first time in years, saw real smiles. People weren't looking over their shoulders anymore. They were hopeful. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about revival. I called an emergency leadership meeting with the remaining department heads, those who weren't part of the rot. When I entered the room, they stood, unsure of what to expect. I didn't sit. I stood in front of them and spoke clearly. You've heard the rumors. Let me confirm them. I told them everything. Not the scandalous details, but the truth. That I'd been behind the company since day one. That the people they feared were gone. That the hierarchy of fear was over. This company was built to empower, I said, not to oppress. And starting today, that's exactly what we'll return to. Merit will matter. Voice will matter. Integrity will matter. They nodded. Slowly at first, then with real conviction. I could see it in their eyes. They were relieved. Inspired, even. As the meeting ended, Sarah pulled me aside. There's something else, she said. 12 employees who resigned under that toxic regime. They've reached out. They want to come back. Let them, I said. Give them better titles. More responsibility. They've earned it. She smiled, just slightly. This is the start of something new. No, I said, glancing toward the window. This is the return of what should have always been. Outside, the skyline shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Orion Tech was still standing. But now it was rising, and I was finally standing at the front. The days that followed were a whirlwind of signatures, restructures, and rebuilding. But beneath it all, there was something else. Something deeper. Peace. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing against my chest. I didn't have to fake weakness or shrink in my own home. I didn't have to play the part of a man forgotten by ambition. Because now, the truth was out, and the reckoning had left behind a clean slate. Vanessa never returned to the house. Not after her public meltdown at Orion Tech. Word traveled fast. Even among her so-called friends, the tide shifted. Without the status, without the wealth, Without the illusion I had let her wear like a crown, she became just another fallen socialite. A woman who built her identity on borrowed power, now stripped bare. The divorce went through faster than either of us expected. She didn't even try to contest it. Her lawyers, what few would still take her call, took one look at the prenup and the evidence I'd laid out and gave her the same advice. Walk. Quietly. And she did. One morning, I woke to find her side of the closet empty. No note. No apology. Just absence. She moved in with her sister 2 states away, I heard. There were rumors of therapy. Whispers of her reinventing herself. I didn't care either way. She'd already shown me who she really was. Meanwhile, back at Orion, we began laying the foundation for a company reborn. I reinstated the employees who had been bullied into silence or pushed out for speaking up. One by one, they returned, not just to their old desks, but to a version of the company that finally reflected what I dreamed it could be. Jennifer, our most gifted programmer, came back to lead our new AI division. The woman who had once been ignored by Monica at every meeting now had a team of her own. And under her guidance, we filed 5 new patents in 6 months, more than the company had achieved in the last 3 years combined. The Thompson account, our largest client, doubled their investment. Other clients followed suit, citing our leadership shift and transparency initiatives as a bold and inspiring move. Profits soared, but the numbers weren't the most important part. What mattered was walking into a building filled with voices that weren't afraid to speak. With people who no longer whispered behind closed doors, but shared ideas freely, without fear of sabotage. For the first time, Orion Tech felt like the company I had once dreamed of in that cramped apartment. Years ago, back when I was just a man with a vision and a stubborn refusal to be ordinary. Still, not everyone was ready to forget. The press caught wind of the executive firings, of course. Whispers turned into headlines. CEO fires entire C-suite in one morning. Power move or personal vendetta? I declined every interview. Let the world speculate. Let them wonder what kind of man orchestrated such a brutal purge. The truth? It wasn't about brutality. It was about justice, boundaries, self-respect, and those things I no longer apologized for. One afternoon, as I stood by the panoramic window of my office, watching the sun dip below the skyline, Sarah entered with the latest report. Final numbers are in, she said. Revenue's up 63%. Client retention's at a record high. And employee satisfaction. She handed me a chart. Through the roof. I nodded, setting the report on the desk. And the mentorship program? Waitlist. 3 months out. A long silence passed between us before she asked the question I knew was coming. Any regrets? I looked at her, at the woman who had stood by me when no one else knew who I was. The woman who'd never once treated me like anything less than the man I truly was. No, I said, my voice quiet but certain. No regrets. Just lessons. Because that's what this was, in the end. A brutal, necessary lesson. About the cost of silence. About the poison of ego. And about the strength it takes to reclaim what others tried to bury. As I stood there, the city lights beginning to flicker one by one, I realized something important. I didn't just fire a few executives. I didn't just divorce a cheating wife. I reclaimed my name, my vision, my dignity. And this time, I wouldn't be hiding behind shadows. This time, I was ready for the light. 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop of Orion Tech, the sun setting behind the skyline, casting long golden shadows across the city. The rooftop garden had once been Vanessa's idea, a vanity project she never got around to finishing. Now it was a place of peace, reflection, closure. Below me, the company pulsed with new energy, a different kind of energy. Laughter in the hallways, doors left open, ideas scribbled on glass walls. It was no longer just a tech company. It was a place people wanted to work, not had to. And I had built it, alone, in silence, through pain, betrayal, and years of mockery. Sarah joined me, holding 2 glasses of scotch. She handed one to me without a word. To Orion, she said, raising her glass. To the future, I replied. We clinked glasses. The sound echoed into the dusk. It hadn't been easy. The fallout after the purge left shockwaves across the industry. Some called me ruthless. Others said I was a genius. A few accused me of vengeance masked as vision. Let them talk. Their words didn't matter. What mattered was what we'd created after the storm. Melissa, Monica, Greg, and Scott all tried to land on their feet, of course. But the receipts followed them, figuratively and literally. Lawsuits were filed. Some companies quietly distanced themselves. Others outright blacklisted them. The truth has a way of staining the people who pretend it won't stick. Angela, the former HR queen, attempted to sue. Her case was dismissed without ceremony. Her recorded threats and cover-ups were more than enough to bury her credibility for good. As for Vanessa, she vanished into obscurity. Moved in with her sister in Arizona, if the rumors were true. She deleted her social media accounts. Cut ties with what remained of her former social circle. Last I heard, she was working part-time at a boutique, trying to piece together a version of herself that didn't depend on status and shallow applause. Do I feel sorry for her? No. She made her choices. And I made mine. What people never understood about me, even back then, was that I never wanted to be flashy. I didn't crave applause or magazine covers. I never needed a spotlight to validate my worth. What I wanted was impact, legacy, a life where my work spoke louder than my words. And now I had it. But something else had changed, too. Something I hadn't anticipated. People started coming to me, not for advice, not for investment, but for stories. Employees, young entrepreneurs, interns. They'd knock on my door, nervous and wide-eyed, asking, "How did you build it? How did you stay quiet for so long? Why didn't you fight back sooner?" The answer was always the same. I was never hiding. I was preparing. Because that's the thing about silence. It's not weakness. It's strategy. I learned that from my father long before any of this. He once told me, "The tree that grows slowly survives the storm. The one that races for the sun snaps at the first gust." He was right. And now, as I stood at the edge of my rooftop, the wind in my face and the city at my feet, I thought about him. About the small shop he lost. The pride he carried even in defeat. He never got to see what his son would build from those ashes. But I carried him with me, every step of the way. Just like I now carried this company, my company, with both hands. I turned back to Sarah, who was scrolling through her tablet. "Press wants another interview," she said. "Forbes, Fortune, even a podcast series." "Still not interested," I replied. She smirked. "Didn't think so. What about the mentorship program?" "Waitlist's a mile long," she said. "And the first group of junior leaders just finished. One of them said it changed his life." I smiled faintly. "Good. That's the point." Before we left the rooftop, I walked to the corner where a small bronze plaque had been installed just last week. It read, "Orion Tech Rooftop Garden, in honor of resilience, redemption, and the power of silence." Below that, just one name. Ethan Walker. Founder. Visionary. Survivor. I ran my fingers along the cool metal. No ego. No anger. Just truth. I turned back toward the stairs. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about resurrection. And I was just getting started. As I stood there beneath the fading sky, one hand resting on the plaque bearing my name, I thought about everything this journey had taught me. Not just about power or betrayal, but about life itself. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. You don't have to shout to be strong. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in patience, in knowing when to act, and in trusting that truth eventually rises. To those who've lived long enough to see the tides of life turn, let me say this. Never let the world convince you that your worth is measured by noise. Whether you're building a business, raising a family, or simply trying to hold on to your dignity in a world that often forgets grace, remember, dignity cannot be stolen. It can only be surrendered, and only if you let it. Betrayal may knock you down. People may laugh at your silence. But if you carry your values like armor, stay true to yourself, and wait for the right moment, you won't just survive, you'll rise. And when you do, the world won't see just your success. They'll see your legacy.